Hi BookTube, it's Andrea, and this is an update on my novel writing research reading endeavors that I talked about back in December. Gosh, that feels like a really long time ago. I have been working on this book for like 7 years, and I'm finally trying to do a final iteration of a first draft of sorts, but it's kind of more like a third draft with my sort of mentor type writing teacher that I've had for several classes at my community college, and we're doing this independent study, and part of that is not only like finalizing this draft so that I can like start having it beta read and stuff like that before looking towards querying, is to be reading things that are informing the process, whether that is novels that are similar in genre or discussion of experiences that I am writing about that I do not have personal experience with. And so I've done a fair bit of that reading, and I thought I would pop in to update about that and about some more discoveries, because I had been kind of looking for some still back in December. And this is kind of functioning as a very belated January wrap-up as well, because most of these were read in January. I think some of them kind of carried over into February, but at any rate, let's get started. Hold on, let me get my computer here. All right, Goodreads is not organizing these very clearly, but first let's talk about In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This, first of all, like took me out of a reading slump of sorts that I'd had, of struggling to read physical books. I just fled through this. This is so gorgeous. I need to reread it, honestly. I was going by it so quickly because I just could not stop reading that I think I would get a lot out of rereading it. It is the author's memoir of being in a psychologically abusive relationship with another woman, and she not only writes about the experience itself through a second person point of view, but she also has a lot of essay type of things about queerness and like folk tales and films about abuse and like sort of this lack of study and representation of abuse in queer relationships, and it's so creative. Like there's lots of footnotes, there's like really short sections that are all titled like Dream House as romance novel, as deja vu, as luck of the draw, as confession, as lesbian cult classic. So it's just, the structure is like super creative. I just have so much admiration for this author, and I did find it quite helpful for my own portrayal of a sort of weird psychologically abusive type of relationship. Really appreciated the sort of discussion of like place and withdrawal from a support network. Later you will learn that a common feature of domestic abuse is dislocation, and it's in a section, I hesitate to call them chapters because they are so short, but I guess if they are chapters. It's called Dream House as World Building, and so it talks about sort of the setting of that, which was really helpful to me in thinking about further deepening a setting in my own story. Gosh, I really should have grabbed all the books that I was going to talk about before I just sat down. But let me go do that. Okay. The sun is like super bright today, but it's also like 9 degrees maybe. Oh, 16! So warm! This is Fahrenheit. It's almost spring. Okay, so next I read The Last True Poets of the Sea, which I also fled through. This was a more of just similar in genre kind of story, and it's we follow Violet and Sam, who are these siblings, and Sam has been dealing with a lot of mental health issues, and he is currently in a sort of like psychiatric ward or like a recovery home type of situation, and Violet is going off to spend the summer with her uncle in this little coastal town that her mom grew up in, that is kind of like haunted by this shipwreck that happened a long time ago that was like Violet's ancestor, and she kind of gets caught up in searching for the shipwreck and meeting all these different people in the town, like particularly this boy who, what is his name, Orion, I think, and then starts to develop a bit of a romance with Liv Stone. This was like a really sort of atmospheric, character driven, but like with bits of like weird things happening kind of story, which is what I am trying to write myself. And while the point of view and like sort of narration style is different from mine, since I'm trying to do like many different points of view but all within a third person, the just like the general setup of the story and like the pacing of it was really helpful for me to just like pay more attention to that. The sort of way that the squad of teens formed and the just like the structure of that, really interesting. And the way that it did incorporate some flashbacks that didn't feel like super info dumpy or anything. And it really showed how like you can have these characters who are recovering from a really intense past situation that happened in the past couple of years or something, that like, because Violet had experienced a lot of like acting out and like wild partying that kind of had defined her, and she was like, she's kind of trying to like figure out who she really is. And of course there's this family struggle with her brother Sam's depression, and but it's like it's following these events that the book could have very well been about the year before, that propelled all of these events to what actually happens in the book, but it didn't. And I thought that was really beautifully done. And like it was funny, my teacher was she was like, I think you have more than one book here within all these events that I was telling her about, just as far as like my characters' backstories. And I'm like, oh, well, to me the story starts here, and like, yes, there's many stories that I could be writing about this past, but like that's just informing what's actually happening within the volume. And I think this was a really good example of that. So I hope that made sense. I then read Far From the Tree by Robin Benway, which was one that I was recommended by Indy from Ode to Books, because I had put out a little like call for recommendations on my Instagram as well. And so we were talking about a bunch of different titles that incorporated some of these elements, and Far From the Tree had a lot of really interesting sibling dynamics and like multiple narrator structure, and one of the parental figures was struggling with addiction, and so all of those were elements that I was especially focused on, and I listened to that audiobook very quickly. I honestly almost forgot about it because I read it so quickly, but it was really good. It was following these three siblings who were adopted by different people, and so they like never knew each other until they kind of fell into contacting each other, then just dealing with all of the various things that were going on in their lives, and like whether or not to track down their mom. So then I listened to Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. This was so beautiful. I struggled to explain it in my video back in December because I just really didn't have a good grasp of what it was about. I just knew that it was my kind of thing, and it sounded like something similar to what I was writing. And yes, both of those things were true. It is just, it's a very quiet book, very introspective. I think there's a lot less events that actually sort of happen in the book than in my own. We follow Mila, who is 19, and she has aged out of the foster care system, and she is arriving at this farm that is run by this elderly couple who has been fostering children for many years, and she's interning as a school teacher to a 9-year-old boy who is one of the foster children at this idyllic, beautiful farm that also has some ghosts hanging around. It is an exploration of trauma and found family, and so atmospheric. Mila is a bit of an unreliable narrator, just like in her perception of like what is happening at this farm, which I found really interesting. And I also just found a lot of inspiration from the prose, regardless of like sort of thematic elements. And it also really impacted me with some personal things as well. So just all around a really lovely book. And then, let's see, then I listened to Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power. This was one that I picked for Midwestern Gothic atmosphere. My book is definitely not a horror, but I want to be able to lean into that kind of Midwestern Gothic atmosphere that I had heard that this book had. It also really delivered on some like complicated mother-daughter themes. I don't know, it kind of seemed to go on a little bit longer than it could have. There was just like a lot of like thought processes that we were dealing with inside Margot, the main character's head. But it was super interesting and really weird, and like the type of horror that I can really get behind. Like it wasn't like really disgusting or really creepy, but it just had the right amount of like unsettling, bizarre, atmospheric kinds of things going on. It's hard to explain. It's like we follow Margot, who has grown up with this very erratic mom and like just kind of has to look out for her. She kind of discovers some things about her mom's past that lead her to contacting her mom's mom, and so she hunts down her mom's birthplace, and strange things start being uncovered about her mom's past, about her grandma, about this town. Lots of things with fires and cornfields, as you can infer from the cover. I didn't like super feel like I had a better grasp on how to write Midwestern Gothic itself after listening to it. I think that was just because of audiobook problems, because I couldn't really like pause and be like, oh, this sentence really evokes this specific atmosphere, because I was just like, oh, and now this is what's happening, just as I was listening, as I was just doing whatever I was doing. Yeah, I don't know, it was really good, and I'm glad I listened to it. Then, oh my gosh, okay, so then I read Rust Belt Femme by Rachel Angeli. This is one of my new favorite books. As with In the Dream House, I think both of those would make a top whatever number of 2021 if I make one of those videos next December. But this, oh my gosh, this was so good. It follows Rachel's early life in and around Cleveland, Ohio. Her father was injured quite early and kind of was under the care of his parents, and so like she and her mom were basically living on their own after she was like 5-ish. It really explores poverty in that is like very place specific to Ohio, and it really explores it in a very anti-state way, which was fantastic. It's got messy mother-daughter relationships, really intense, strong friendships between young girls that form. I think she was like, there were so many beautiful bits from her like middle school, high school times with these two really close girlfriends that she had. Her just falling into punk music and culture of the 90s, and I guess like 90s into early 2000s was just so great. Her love for alternative culture, sort of that predecessor to her coming out as queer in college, I think, or maybe towards the end of high school. It's so like viscerally described, and you can really see like the real community that she found there, and just the empowerment. A lot about like relationships that don't always work out, but like really impact your life anyways. She incorporates a handful of like quotes from like feminist or leftist theorists. There's like a lot on like community care that's like not necessarily like intentionally based around the sort of like transformative justice perspective of it, but just the kind that happens when you live in a community of poor folks who need to support each other, because the state's obviously not going to do that. The sort of stumbling into anarchy that she experienced, just this whole chapter where she went to Food Not Bombs with her friend and was like just this sort of clueless teenager who's just like, well, I want to help out, I want to do this, and then she doesn't understand that the cat is named after Emma Goldman, and she like feels this like huge rush of shame, and I just felt that so much. And just the way that she writes about her past self with such an awareness, such a tenderness, a really deep understanding of the nuance of the way that she grew up and the type of cultures that she was around. I don't know, I'm just blabbling about this book at this point, but I just love it very much, and I'm so happy that my teacher read this book as well. It was a very cool experience. As far as the way that this applies to the book itself, there's just a lot of different things that probably would take too much explaining and of the actual project that I'm working on. but it really was quite helpful. Not necessarily with bringing a bunch of new information, but just like to be more immersing myself into aspects of it and really recognizing parts of the characters that I want to dive deeper into. Yeah, I'm sure this is not going to be the last time that I gush about this book on my Wii channel, so. Oh yeah, so I reread The Wicker King by Kay Ancrum for the third time because the audiobook came out in the end of January. And so I reread it kind of like looking through the pages a little bit as I was reading. And my teacher also read it, and then her daughter read it, which was like, I was just so excited about that. Dark, weird YA. I loved experiencing this again. And I also can't wait for the audiobook of The Weight of the Stars. I think it's end of April that one's coming out. Oh, this one's coming back out. And then I listened to Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Vaid Menon. This was like an hour long. It was really short and sweet, very, you know, by virtue of its length, a bit of a surface level exploration of genderqueerness, but it was fantastic. I don't think it really brought anything particularly new to my understanding. It definitely like provided a lot of concise sort of like rebuttals to confusion that like people have about gender in general. I had picked it up for this, I mean, not only because I love following the author on Instagram and just have been wanting to read it, because there is a non-binary character in the book, but it didn't like specifically hit on anything that I was thinking of for them, but I think that's just because it's something that I'm super familiar with, so I don't know what I'm really saying here, but I just am talking about it because I read it in end of January or beginning of February, so yeah. And then the last thing that I finished was Good Morning, Destroyer of Men's Souls by Nina Renata Aaron. This was a recommendation that I got from watching Sean and Bert at the Storytime. Sean had mentioned it from probably like in one of their videos from like back in the fall, but she said something about it being about being in a relationship with an addict, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a relevant thing to what I was wanting to research. And it was interesting. I don't think it like hit on exactly what I was looking for, just because it was like a memoir of the author's experience being in a relationship with someone who was addicted to various types of drugs, I believe. It wasn't like super clear, but it's also kind of like mashed together in my brain because I got the ebook from the library and then didn't read it right away, and then I had to read it really, really fast on my Kindle before I had to go back, like, because I couldn't renew it. So anyways, and then her sister was also an addict when she was in high school. The like specific things that were touched on about that were like somewhat helpful. It was very engrossing. My teacher and I were talking about it a little bit afterwards, and we're kind of like feeling like maybe it would have been a better idea for the author to wait till she was like more distanced from this relationship and her own addiction issues, because she still was writing about it in a way that was like, it felt kind of glamorized, and like she wasn't really able to like analyze her ex's behavior in a way that was like really seeing it for what it was. Like she still seemed to be like very enmeshed in that headspace that she was when she was still in the relationship, which was just interesting to see, just like her own recovery and her own perspective about him, which I think can really play into one of my characters. And I was also just like really craving a lot more like theory and analysis. She kept bringing up like sort of different feminist theory things, and like almost, but it was like a few sentences and then it would just kind of like fizzle out, and I was like, well, wait, can you just like keep going with this analysis, because this is great, but then she just doesn't keep going, because she has a lot of financial privilege in this situation. Her family was like quite like upper middle class, like they didn't, I don't know, there was just like some interesting like bits of touching on her privilege or bits of touching on her family's Jewish identity, but then like not really fully diving into that and like the implications of that. How she and her friends were able to like move across the country so easily because their families were able to support them financially, and like just the sort of power dynamics in the relationship that she had, especially after Rust Belt Femme. I was just like, but I want more. And also like a lot of the discussion of like codependency as like the person who is in the relationship with the alcoholic. They're called the codependents. And like there was a lot of discussion of Al-Anon and like, and then AA, which I guess are separate things, because like Al-Anon is like for the people who are in relationships with alcoholics. There was just like a lot of like psychology from like the 50s and like discussion of the formation of that. And I'm like, but this is so old. Like, is there more new like psychology research that you can like contrast? So I don't know. That was just an interesting thing that I was feeling kind of like let down by. I was recommended by my aunt this book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. This is a hefty sort of scientific thing. Close Encounters with Addiction is the subtitle, and my aunt was saying this was like the cutting edge book on addiction from like 2010. And my teacher picked it up and just like sped through it and was really saying how good it was, and I'm only like this far into it. But it's very well written so far. It's the author was a doctor who was working with a lot of addicts, and then really like delves into why and how it happens, and just like really coming at it from like a non-judgmental point of view, and like talking about harm reduction and challenging the war on drugs and proposing a more holistic, constructive set of alternatives. So I don't know if it's going to be like as radical as I was hoping for to like find some material on, but I think looking at like the Harm Reduction Coalition website and like other sorts of online resources would also really help me with understanding more of that. And as well, just speaking of the drugs research that I'm attempting to do, there was a show that a friend recommended to me called Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, which is on Hulu, and it follows this sort of eccentric young man named Hamilton Morris who goes around and just does kind of like investigations of different types of drugs around the world. It's just very much like this is how it is, and not like coming at it from like this sensationalized, I don't know, I guess it's a little bit sensationalized, but it's just like, I was seeing some different documentaries on Netflix or other places that were like about drugs, but were coming at it from like, I think one of them was like a host who used to be part of the CIA or something, and I'm just like, I don't want this like state related sort of like ooh, drugs, like documentary that I just was like, this feels really uncomfortable. I don't want to watch this. Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia is like definitely the opposite of that. It's just like this fascination with the science and the fascination with just like hearing people's stories about it and just not being in any way like hard and fast judgmental about anything. And it was just super fascinating, and I learned a lot. There was also this really interesting article that my teacher had one of the college librarians, like she asked him for resource ideas, and he suggested this article on opium poppies by Michael Pollan, who is like a health food writer, I guess. I don't know. I'm not really sure exactly what's up with him, but he had this interesting article about growing poppies from like the late 90s, and I learned a lot from that too. So that's another bit of updates on that. And then I also have the Collected Schizophrenias that I bought in my recent haul. I mean, one of my friends was like, this is the best book on mental health that I have ever read, is what they were telling me. And so I think just because that's a thing that I explore a lot in the book, I was really wanting to read this. So I'm going to be getting to that one soon, and then also to Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls by T. Kira Madden. There are a couple other novels that I'm hoping to get to at some point. Loveless, Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Indy also recommended How to Make a Wish by Ashley Herring Blake. And there are also some books that I was just really thinking a lot about in terms of dual perspective, like The House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Cassara, even though that's like not at all topically similar. It's just like, I was thinking a lot about just like how like triple or quadruple perspective third person novels are done. And I was also thinking about Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis, about that sort of like juggling all these different points of view and making it like cohesive and not really like distracting. I still had yet to read those zines in the poetry book, but I have found some more sort of either articles or like podcast things about Cuban food. I listened to a lot of interviews with Laura Taylor Namey, who wrote A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow. I made some recipes, and I'm hoping to still make some more that are from actually Cuban food bloggers. So that was like a really cool bit of like sort of hands-on research, even though I'm not sure that's going to be like in the book itself. Juggling all of these as well as different reads for like book clubs and buddy reads and stuff, I'm just kind of like, oh my goodness, I'm just like reading a million things at one time. But that's how it is for a lot of us, I think, right? I will close off for now, but I've got a good bit of progress with my early chapters, and I'm really loving that the way that this process of studying stuff to really inform my own writing is going, and I will come back with another update at some point soon. All right, thanks for watching. Goodbye.